Welcome to my Write With Me session number 19, where I'm working on Island Dawn at Maui. On this session, I'm going to be working on, let me check my notes here, chapter 25. Island Dawn at Maui is one of my destination romance stories and novels in my Maui Desire Series. And if you want a free copy of Moonlight at Wailea, just check out link below. You just give me the email and you get a free romance novel. It's not a bad way to go. I dictate all my books I write all my books by dictation, and that's how I roll it. You can check out my playlists for all the books that I have and the dictations. I also write thrillers as well, but these books are written under my pen name, Aaron Belsing, for the romance. So what I'm going to do is just get started on my dictation of chapter 25. And I just dictate into iOS notes on my iPad, and then I just copy the transcription out and then just start editing it. It works very well. You'll see how many words I produce here. It's pretty fun. Okay, and I'm beginning dictation. Island Dawn on Maui, chapter 25. The next morning, Dean and Mara continued to work on the property, upgrading it and making fixes as best as they can, while Wes and his assistant were also working on the main house. The appraiser that they had, the appraiser that Calvin had contacted to get a appraisal of the property, returned and showed up to the property to look around. He talked with both Dean and Mara, explaining that he had already seen it with Glenn and they had some upgrades, but based on the work that still needed to be done, it's far enough along, he said, to evaluate the property more fairly. But if you want the top market value, okay, then you could see, or Dean could see, the man was a little bit hesitant in his evaluation of the property, but he was clearly going to give a fair assessment right now. So as he finished up his work, Mara and Dean walked him through the main house and showing him the usable acreage. It took a couple hours because the property being 4.5, almost 5 acres, it took quite a bit to get everything to work and get the appraiser there. What's the name? Jack told Mara and Dean that what they had right now was working pretty well once they finished out and wandering around. And he said, I can pretty much give you a ballpark what you've done versus what needs to be done. And he told them that the appraisal will come in, he's guessing, roughly around $3.5 million. At that moment, Mara's jaw dropped and she started to flex her shoulders back and breathe in. And Dean stepped in between her and Jack and said, hey, that's great. We appreciate it. Now, I understand that other properties appraise much higher and we have a lot more outbuildings. Can you explain, if you don't mind, why the appraisal came in the way it did? And he said simply, there's a lot of access issues. Your road is pulverized and it needs to be cut back, and also the multiple outbuildings are still in a little bit of rough shape. Now, if you spruced everything up, this would be a whole different ball game. You've got an incredible property. It's just there's a lot of work to be done, and it's not just paint. Dean looked at Mara and visually showed her, just calm down, it's okay. She stepped back for a moment and tilted her head and looked around the space and then looked at Jack. So you're saying the appraisal could be much higher if we put in, what do you call it? Sweat equity, Dean said. Jack said, yes, absolutely. If you put in a lot of sweat equity and you get this place all spruced up, you are sitting on a substantial historic property. Now, I understand your uncle, Mr. Glenn Rollins, he was looking at the historical connection with Maui, but he didn't complete that. Is that correct? And Mara shook her head or nodded and said yes. He didn't move it far enough along to have anything serious happen. Jack stood there and rubbed his chin for a moment and then looked around the empty space around the main house and then looked at the trees where the tropical birds were fluttering around and chirping. And then he, after looking at the space, he looked back at them and said, well, it's potentially a good thing that he didn't do that because you will have some restrictions. That said, it also gives you some more value, so that's something you're going to have to evaluate. He pulled out his tablet and punched in some info, and he said, I'll email you over the PDF when it's all complete, but I need your signature that you receive this information. So both Mara and Dean signed on his tablet. He thanked them very much and got in his truck and began driving out. Both of them stood there as they watched him slowly roll out and disappear along the roadway. They could still hear the truck tires clumping in the muddy holes on the access road leaving from the house. Once he was well out of sight, they both walked up onto the deck and stood side by side, leaning on the railing, looking over the view they had of the ocean. Mara broke the silence first and said, so at 3.5 or so from what he said, that 49% I have is, that's kind of life-changing, don't you think? Dean agreed and stood there not looking at her for a moment and said, you're right, that would be life-changing, but the restrictions that we have from your uncle and the capacity of what this place could be is incredible, but I got to remind you. And Mara waited with her shoulders tense of what Dean was going to say. And he said, that appraisal is not a check. I mean, the only offer that we've had is a ridiculously lowball offer at $1.5 million. Kenji's house comes in at almost $5 million, and he doesn't have nearly the buildings we have. You mean all those buildings affect the appraisal that much? Well, remember, he said, continuing and looking across the space and up and down the decks, Kenji's house is super well maintained. The property is cleared. I mean, he's got a lot of sweat equity in that place. Mara stood up and flexed her back, stretching her back and pulling her tank top down with her shorts. And then she walked over and sat on one of the wood chairs and creaked it back. Dean walked over to her and grabbed her shoulder and began caressing it. She leaned into him. And again, one of the yellow birds flew by and sat on the rail, stared at them for a moment, chirped a couple times, and then flew off. I wonder why those birds stay here, Mara said out loud. I don't know, Dean said, but it's a thing. I've seen a few on Kenji's property, but nothing like here. They're really beautiful. Well, the thing is now, at least we have an appraisal, and if we had to get out, we could. Dean pulled up the other chair and sat next to her and then looked at her and said, we could get out, but my guess, based on Kenji's property and this, we could easily hit $5 or $6 million. Plus, and he emphasized this in his voice, that as a property that we continue to own, long term, we could get so much more money out of it. How's that? She asked, looking at him with her eyes in a slit, unsure of what he said, or not believing what he said. And Dean chose his words carefully and said, I know you're still interested in selling, and it sounds like, Seattle's still the place for you, but this property long term can give us a check that pays and pays and pays forever, even if it has some maintenance and upkeep and whatnot. I've had people with properties that were in the same state, and they put the work into it, and now they get a nice check every month, ostensibly forever. How's that even possible? I mean, you rent the place out occasionally on an Airbnb, Mara asked. And he shook his head. No, not even that Airbnb thing. Events, schedulers, retreats, way, way beyond that. We get on the radar with event planners. All of a sudden, you have a place. I mean, there's several properties on the island that already have a gorgeous website, and they're doing super well. Really, she asked. She pulled out her phone and looked it up, and Dean told her the name of the place, and she flipped it up, typed it in, and began a web search. In a few moments, she punched up the property, and she asked him, "Is this it?" He nodded at the phone, and she began scrolling, and her mouth slowly turned into a circle, and she simply said, "Wow," under her breath. Our property could be this? Dean chuckled for a moment as he looked out at the view of the ocean. Our property can actually be more because we have more buildings on it. We have more access. It simply needs a heck of a lot of work, but we could be doing as well, if not better than them. Well, I know how to put together a website, like a really good one. I'm good at WordPress. I mean, I know how to hook stuff up. I kind of do that on the side. Really? Dean asked. Oh, you have another skill I didn't even know. Oh, she said, I'm full of surprises. Just then, Dean's phone rang. He pulled it out and looked at it. Oh, looks like Calvin's calling us back. Probably Fran first, Mara said. He swiped it open and held it to the speakerphone, or clicked speakerphone, and said, "Hello, this is Dean." "Hello, Mr. Benton. This is Fran with Mr. Vaughn's office." Yes, of course. You're on speakerphone. Is that okay?" "Yes, of course. Let me put Mr. Vaughn through." There was clicking and clacking, some clattering around coming over the phone. Then Calvin's voice came on to the phone. "How did it go with the appraiser?" he asked directly. And Mara was the first to answer. "Actually, really well, but the offer's still way lower than a lot of the other the appraisal's still way lower than a lot of the other properties." Calvin hummed and hawed for a moment and said, "Well, that's what I was calling about. Is there's just a lot of stuff. You have massive potential." And he said, let's see, what did he say? "You have massive potential like that one rental property that people use." And Mara said the name, and Calvin said, "Yes, that is one of the best examples. You actually have more under your feet, but your gold is covered in dirt." "Well, that's good to know, Calvin, but what are we still going to do about that? I mean, is that offer still open from that buyer's agent?" Calvin said, "Yes, that's what I'm calling about. I contacted them just to see what's going on, and they said the offer is still happily open, and they didn't sound like they were going anywhere anytime soon without it." Dean handed Mara the phone and stood up and flexed his back, rubbing the lower part of his back because it was sore from all the work. Calvin continued and explained that the offer hadn't changed and that there was no movement, but it certainly hadn't been rescinded. They talked a few moments with Calvin about the details of that and then thanked him and hung up. Mara stood up and clomped across the deck, the wood echoing under the lanai cover, and they both again leaned on the railing, staring out. And she said, so basically, even though the appraiser gave us a value, that doesn't mean squat, does it? Dean slowly shook his head, looking out over the palm trees near the ocean swaying back and forth in the warm trade winds of the late morning, and he said, nope, you can appraise a painting for all you want, but if you can't convince somebody to buy it for $1, then that appraiser is worth just that. Mara walked back up and down the deck for a few moments, and Dean silently watched her, pacing, her arms crossed across her chest, pressing up her whatever shirt she was wearing, her shirt against her for a moment, and then rubbed her chin and said, you know what? We need more repairs. It would be absurd for a lifetime to let millions of dollars go, or what you say is income. Exactly. Now we're talking. Are you ready to get into this even more hardcore, Mara? She looked at him for the first time with eyes wide open, sparkling with energy in her voice, and said, hell yeah. I'm not losing that kind of money, or maybe in lifetime income. Perfect. Okay, that was 15 minutes of recording. And let me rename the chapter here. Island Dawn, chapter 25. Okay, so that was that many minutes of recording. I will now copy the transcript, and we'll see how long that was. Copy. All right. I'll put that on my laptop. I use Scrivener as my software for writing. Pasting from my iPad. Boom. Sweet. I'll show you right here that 15 minutes of dictation translated to 2,101 word. Sweet. So there you go. That was chapter 25 of the Write With Me session, number 19. I will have many more for Island Dawn. I've got to continue working on this, but remember, you can check the links below in the description and find Island Dawn, but you can also get Moonlight at Wailea just by clicking the link in the description and get a free romance, and then check out the other books if you like that. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Aaron R. Linsdau. I'm writing my romances under the pen name Aaron Belsing at aaronbelsing.com. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.